Jake Morrison had been running cattle on the Double M Ranch for 15 years, ever since his father passed and left him the sprawling property in the Montana foothills. At 35, he was weathered by sun and wind, with calloused hands that knew every fence post and water trough on his 1,000 acres. Tonight, all he wanted was to collapse into his bed after 18 hours of chasing down strays in the autumn cold. The old farmhouse creaked as he climbed the front steps, his boots heavy with mud and exhaustion. He'd lost 3 head to a break in the north fence, spent half the day repairing it, and the other half tracking down his wayward cattle through dense pine forest. His shoulders ached, his back protested with every movement, and he hadn't eaten since dawn. Jake pushed open the front door, already mentally preparing for his usual routine: a quick sandwich, maybe a beer, and then blessed unconsciousness until the sun demanded his attention again. But the sight that greeted him stopped him dead in his tracks. 3 women sat around his kitchen table, steaming mugs in their hands, looking as comfortable as if they owned the place. The eldest, a striking brunette in her early 30s, smiled warmly. "You must be Jake. I'm Elena Cartwright." The middle sister, with auburn hair cascading over her shoulders, waved from her seat. "I'm Maria. We've been waiting for you." The youngest, barely out of her 20s with golden blonde hair, bounced slightly in her chair. "And I'm Sophie. We brought coffee and apple pie." Jake stood in his own doorway, hat still on his head, completely bewildered. "Ladies, I'm sorry, but I think there's been some mistake. This is private property, and I have no idea how you got in here or what you want." Elena stood gracefully, her expensive-looking boots clicking on the worn linoleum. "There's no mistake, Mr. Morrison. We're the Cartwright sisters from Denver. Our grandmother was Rose Cartwright, though you might have known her as Rose Murphy." The name hit Jake like a physical blow. Rose Murphy. He sank into the nearest chair, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "Rose Murphy was your grandmother." "She was," Maria said softly. "She passed 3 months ago and left us something rather interesting in her will. Something that concerns you directly." Sophie practically vibrated with excitement. "She left us a letter explaining everything about the summer of 1987, about your father Thomas Morrison, and about a promise she made." Jake's mind raced back to stories his father had told him about that summer, the year before Jake was born. His mother had died in a car accident that spring, leaving his father devastated and drinking heavily. The ranch had nearly gone under, until a mysterious benefactor had provided the money to save it enough to pay off debts, repair equipment, and keep the operation running. "Your grandmother saved this ranch," Jake said quietly. Elena nodded. "She did, but she never told us the full story until her final letter. She was in love with your father, Jake. They had a brief romance that summer, but she was engaged to our grandfather, a wealthy businessman in Denver. She chose duty over love, but couldn't bear to see Thomas lose everything. She gave him $50,000. Maria continued. A fortune in 1987, but she made him promise something in return." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Montana weather. "What kind of promise?" Sophie leaned forward eagerly. "If he or his family ever needed help, the Cartwrights would provide it, and if the Cartwrights ever needed the refuge of the ranch, it would be available to them." "We need that refuge now," Elena said simply. Jake studied their faces, noting for the first time the tension beneath their polite smiles, the way Maria's hands trembled slightly around her mug, the dark circles under Sophie's eyes. "What kind of trouble are you in?" The sisters exchanged glances, and Elena seemed to come to a decision. "Our grandfather built his fortune through some questionable business practices. After grandmother died, we discovered that several of his former partners are very interested in collecting old debts, the kind of debts that don't get settled in courtrooms. We've been living in hotels for 2 months, Maria added, moving every few days, looking over our shoulders. The lawyers say it could take years to sort out grandfather's estate and determine what's legitimate debt and what's extortion. We just need somewhere safe to stay while this gets resolved," Sophie said. Grandmother's letter said this ranch would always be sanctuary for the Cartwright family. Jake ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of a promise made before. He was born settling on his shoulders like a heavy yoke. The ranch was isolated, certainly, And he had plenty of space. The old bunkhouse hadn't been used in years, but was still solid. But having 3 city women on his property would turn his quiet, predictable life completely upside down. "I suppose I don't have much choice in the matter," he said finally. A Morrison always honors his word. The relief on their faces was palpable. But Jake held up a hand. "But we need to establish some ground rules. This is a working ranch, not a vacation resort. I'm up before dawn and work until dark. I can't be entertaining guests or playing tour guide. We don't expect to be entertained." Elena assured him, "We can take care of ourselves." Jake almost smiled at that. He'd seen plenty of city folk who thought they could handle ranch life. "We'll see. The bunkhouse is habitable, but it's basic. No room service, no maid service. You'll need to pull your own weight around here." "What kind of weight?" Sophie asked. "Feeding chickens, gathering eggs, helping with meals when we're working cattle, general maintenance, cleaning, whatever needs doing. This isn't a free ride." Maria straightened in her chair. "I was a chef before all this happened. I can handle cooking. I have an MBA," Elena added. "I might be able to help with your books. Business planning." Sophie grinned. "And I'm really good at organizing things. And I love animals," despite himself. Jake found their enthusiasm almost infectious. "Almost. We'll start with you not burning down my kitchen and go from there. The bunkhouse is about 100 yards behind the barn. I'll show you to it, but then I really need some sleep. Tomorrow starts at 5 a.m. As they gathered their belongings and followed him through the moonlit yard, Jake wondered what he'd gotten himself into. 3 beautiful women from the city, running from dangerous men, about to turn his peaceful ranch into God knew what kind of chaos. The bunkhouse was clean, but sparse for narrow beds, a wood stove, basic furniture that had housed countless ranch hands over the decades. The sisters surveyed their new home with the kind of determined optimism that Jake recognized from his own early days trying to save the ranch. "It's perfect," Elena said firmly. "It's an adventure," Sophie added. "It's safe," Maria concluded. And Jake heard the profound relief in her voice as he walked back to the house. Jake reflected on the strange turns life could take. This morning, he'd been a solitary rancher whose biggest concern was a broken fence. Tonight, he was harboring 3 fugitives from Denver high society, bound by a promise his father had made to a woman Jake had never met. He paused at his front door and looked back toward the bunkhouse, where warm light glowed in the windows, and he could hear the soft murmur of the sisters talking. For the first time in years, the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. Maybe one night of good sleep wasn't the most important thing after all. As Jake finally settled into his own bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that his quiet life was over, and something much more complicated was just beginning. The Cartwright sisters had arrived at the Double M Ranch with secrets, danger, and the promise of change written in his father's debt of honor. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, for the first time in months, 3 women would sleep safely, and a lonely rancher would dream of possibilities he'd never dared imagine. "I've created a 2,000-word story based on your title. This tale takes the premise in a different direction than you might expect. Instead of a typical romance scenario, I crafted a story about honor, family debts, and unexpected sanctuary. The story features Jake Morrison, a hard-working rancher who just wants to rest after a grueling day, but finds 3 sisters in his kitchen who reveal a connection to his family's past. The Cartwright sisters are fleeing danger related to their grandfather's shady business dealings, and invoke an old promise made to their grandmother, who once saved Jake's ranch. The story explores themes of family honor and keeping promises across generations, finding refuge and new beginnings, the clash between city and country life, how strangers can change our lives unexpectedly. Would you like me to adjust the tone, add more romance elements, or take the story in a different direction?